Hello, everybody. I'm Kaylea Champion, and I do research on how people collaborate online to build amazing projects like Linux and Wikipedia. And that work also includes what doesn't get created, what doesn't get maintained, and whose voices get excluded. I'm part of the Community Data Science Collective, which is a multi-university laboratory. And the work I want to share with you today is part of about a 5-year project, almost a dozen researchers now, around a theme of trying to understand the value of anonymity. Aaron cared about this topic too, and in Raw Thoughts, he wrote about the same places where our team has been studying the value of anonymity, Tor and Wikipedia. He argued that we should pay attention to people on the margins of a community and that we should take action to defend people who seek anonymity online. I think you'll see that his perspective is substantively borne out in the record of empirical research that we and others in our field have built. So a lot of different and competing images might come to your mind when you think about the concept of anonymity. Some positive, some negative, some hopeful, some fearful. And in our research, we try to bring new evidence to the question of the value of anonymity. We began by trying to understand the perspective of people who seek anonymity online, including those who do so while contributing to Wikipedia and people who use Tor, even those in both categories, those who contribute to Wikipedia while using Tor. So who are these folks seeking anonymity online, and why do they want to be anonymous? I would guess that this audience has several answers to that question, but stick with me here. Certainly, people use anonymity to break laws or to violate terms of service. Some folks who are seeking anonymity do so out of a strong and principled preference to remain anonymous in some setting, as a human right, as a public good, or a sense that the powerful are not entitled to our information just because they want it. Some folks, though, have a deep necessity to keep their identity private for safety because of stigma or harassment or oppression. Engaging fully in the online world can put some people's lives at risk. And when Forte et al. Interviewed people seeking anonymity in online communities, the interviewees shared a very wide range of risks that they negotiate, including harassment, violence, reputation loss. Individuals may be targeted by abusers, stalkers, oppressive governments, hate groups, identity thieves based on their online activities. For some people, being able to conceal identifying information is what allows them to live their everyday life using online services in the same way as the rest of society. And these are not theoretical concerns, as well we know. When the team did its work, which was published originally in 2017, some of the devastating details about the imprisonment and 2015 state murder of Syrian Wikipedian Bassel Khartabil had not yet come to light. Since that time, news stories have emerged about the targeting of Wikipedians, including Wikipedians in Belarus. In November 2021, Belarusian Pavel Pernikau was sentenced to 2 years in a penal colony for editing Wikipedia articles about the murders of journalists and protesters. And today, you or I might be able to say Russia has invaded Ukraine and write that on Wikipedia without fearing for our safety. But in March of this year, Belarusian Wikipedian Mark Bernstein was jailed for this and now lives under house arrest. In the wake of the invasion, the Russian language edition of Wikipedia moved to hide the identity of editors for their safety. It was too little too late. Editors were already being doxxed. And there are numerous examples of how ordinary actions that are safe for some of us are extremely dangerous for others, or actions that were safe for some of us at some place and time under some regime now place us at risk in another place and time or under a new regime. And in our study, we were very fortunate to be able to hear these stories about the necessity of anonymity because we could promise our interview participants that we would maintain their anonymity. But those anonymity seekers are unlikely to be decision makers on product teams and platform governance boards. Their needs and voices go unrepresented. Many sites make it quite difficult to conceal identifying information and maintain anonymity. Real name, birth date, postal code, credit card, account creation. So we did a project inquiring into how platforms think about anonymity seekers. What kinds of concerns did platforms describe? Putting aside lost revenue from things like targeting ads and reselling information to data brokers, One answer is that service providers and communities, like anonymity seekers, worry about harassment. Platforms also want to hold people personally accountable for bad behavior. Another answer, there are unknown unknowns. Perhaps we can see the damage being caused by people who aren't being held accountable, but the value anonymity seekers bring and the impact if we block them can be hard to see. Another answer is that it can be difficult for people who can be identified without fear to speak on behalf of those who lack that privilege. Taking up the perspective of anonymity seekers can be a substantial challenge. So platforms see a trade-off between safety and risk, or maybe it should be said a trade-off that equates closure and safety and openness with risk. Platforms see problems coming in from perhaps suspect anonymity seekers, and they have a community and an environment they want to protect. So we wanted to understand these trade-offs just a bit more. This example, it's kind of a fun one, is drawn from fandom.com, formerly Wikia, home to more than 250,000 sites, user-generated content on a wide range of themes. There's probably a site about any TV show or movie fandom you can imagine, books, hobbies, etc. And like other user-generated content sites, fandom found itself inundated with vandalism, spam, and other kinds of bad behavior. And they did what many platforms do. They instituted requirements around accounts, but they did it in a way that we could track the impact. And the paper by Hill and Shaw found that this decision to require accounts carried some hidden costs in terms of decreasing activity. So this figure, you can tell this is a talk being given by an academic because cue the graphs. This figure is excerpted from Hill and Shaw's paper. I'll talk you through it. It's what's called an interrupted time series. On the left, we have kind of what the trend line looked like before the change, then the little dotted line at the sort of change point, and then on the right, what kind of things look like after the change. So what we see here is a couple of impacts. First, the number of accounts created jumps, and that's expected. You are required to have an account to contribute, so maybe you make one. Next, the volume of unwanted participation falls. That's great, that's what they wanted. But the bottom two graphs represent problems. This one is the overall volume of good participation also falls. This is this fourth one at the bottom here is the quality of that participation in terms of whether the edits that were made actually stick around. So the quality and the volume both fall off. What this means is that this maneuver that I'm calling closure or instituting an account requirement, it's supposed to keep communities safe. But what we see in this example is that it might also harm them by discouraging participation in ways that might be hard to see unless we look outside the intended consequences. So the rest of my examples are drawn from Wikipedia, and Wikipedia, as we know, is powered by a large community of volunteers, and it has a real mix of people who have never contributed, and this is their first contribution, so they're kind of newcomers, as well as people who've been around for years and years. Wikipedia allows contributions from a wide range of folks, including people without accounts in most language editions. And this variation in the kinds of people who can participate lets us make comparisons between the behaviors of groups of people whose identifiability varies. So I'm going to talk you through this graph too. We did a comparison of work done on Wikipedia by 4 groups. First, newcomers in the left here in red. Next up, we have our Tor-based editors, people contributing to Wikipedia from Tor. Third category in blue shows folks who are contributing without an account. And then in purple, people with accounts who have a little bit more experience under their belt. The y-axis is a quality prediction using machine learning trained by Wikipedians themselves. And across the x-axis is time. So what can we kind of discern from this graph? Tor-based editors, this anonymity-seeking group that's been subject to a lot of perhaps suspicion actually performs better than newcomers. They're a lot like other people without accounts, although they don't perform as well as registered account holders. They're certainly comparable to other folks whose contributions are still welcomed within Wikipedia. And this example using Tor certainly lets us kind of focus in on these anonymity-seeking users, but you could make a similar type of comparison in other platforms looking at verified and non-verified users, longtime members versus newcomers, and so on. So overall, these anonymity seekers, we're seeing them at about the same or maybe slightly better level of quality than other folks who are a little more welcome on the platform. And this is a little bit of a surprising result if we think about the suspicion that anonymity seekers can receive. Their behavior is very similar to other groups, and it really suggests the value of the other explanations that I offered in the early parts of the slide. So anonymity seeking by preference, anonymity seeking for safety. Here we see direct evidence that anonymity seekers are a lot like everybody else, just trying to live their lives in ways that maybe some of us take for granted. So what about unique or particular value? What might make anonymity seekers different? One thing that we did observe was that Tor-based editors, these anonymity seekers, were more likely to contribute to political, religious, and technical subjects, which seems pretty valuable, less likely to contribute to articles on, say, American football. So just a population with maybe some different interests and skills. To investigate this unique value a little bit further, I did some work to reconstruct the stories of some of these contributions from Tor. Even though Tor-based editors at the time were banned from using Wikipedia, that ban was not technologically perfect yet. And for several years, some top Tor-based editors were able to kind of run the blockade and make their edits. So in those Wikipedia contributions from Tor, we found a lot of typical behavior, factual additions, typo fixing, as well as vandalism, but certainly kind of typical everyday stuff within Wikipedia. That said, I also found some work that suggests a need for anonymity, some vulnerability on the part of the contributor, writing about human rights abuses, removing the work of conspiracy theorists. Those folks sometimes bite back. So that's work that could get some pushback and draw harassment. One of the examples that's really stuck with me from this work, we were able to reconstruct shows a Tor-based editor adding news links about human rights abuses being committed by a global mining company. There was, in fact, a bit of an edit war between this Tor-based editor and what appeared to be people associated with the mining company. And I say that because they were using IP addresses I looked up with Whois. They were registered to the mining company at the time. So trying to include this information that the company seemingly did not want highlighted, that's the valuable work that an anonymity seeker was doing, despite the fact that Wikipedia at the time was trying to block them from the platform. Shortly after this series of edits that I'm telling you about with the mining company unfolded, Wikipedia updated its code, improved its approach to blocking Tor users, and we stopped seeing edits from Tor. The controversy about human rights abuses from this mining company disappeared from the company's article. There's no mention of it now. And as I was prepping for this talk, I realized that Aaron did this same kind of edit by edit analysis that I'm describing, but he did his of the biography of Alan Alda in describing the value of peripheral contributors, folks without accounts or newcomers, those who kind of happen across an article that needs an expansion, or that perhaps something that they're uniquely positioned or uniquely motivated to provide. So all that said, the Wikipedia community has reasons for banning anonymity-seeking behaviors because much of the vandalism they seek to prevent comes in from people without accounts. They're trying to protect a globally significant resource, and they have in hand kind of this very blunt instrument. Block the avenues that allow for trivial sock puppeting and spoofing like Tor and VPNs, block addresses or address ranges where they're seeing unwanted behavior, and require accounts. So we did some further analysis of unwanted behavior, vandalism on Wikipedia. Same four groups from my kind of multicolor squiggly lines before. We found that Tor users, that most anonymous group, were actually less likely to vandalize than other kinds of folks without accounts. They're more comparable to newcomers in this case. But one distinction that we did find was that vandalism from Tor was a little less sociable and jokey in terms of the kind of vandalism or the things that people were writing on pages. Tor users were directly attacking the Wikipedia community because at the time it was trying to ban them. So I've made the case here that there's some good that might be lost if we exclude people based on anonymity seeking. But as I mentioned, platforms and communities look at this as a trade-off where closure equals safety and openness equals risk. So what can these stories about contribution types kind of tell us about this trade-off? I want to propose thinking in just one more dimension instead of cost benefit. You can apply this line of thinking to any community, thinking about the kinds of activity that goes on. I've categorized it into some kind of fuzzy bubbles here and then positioned it on an XY axis. So on the Y axis, kind of up and down here, there's the value of that kind of activity to the community, from it damages what they're trying to do versus it's quite valuable to what they're trying to do. On the X-axis here, or left to right, I'm kind of speculating where anonymity might range from being irrelevant to perhaps critical, even acknowledging that for some folks, any kind of participation is quite risky. So if we picture contributions on these two axes, we can think about what might be gained and lost by whom when we change identity policies. And this doesn't even include the spillover impacts or other kind of unintended consequences that we saw in fandom.com. Okay, so what can we do if we want to save space for valuable participation from anonymity seekers? One option is to incorporate anonymity seekers into the operational model of the site. This is certainly, in some communities, they've chosen to take the good with the bad. Maybe they've got throwaway accounts or other kinds of mechanisms, but anonymity is part of the model. Secondly, we've seen examples where identity policy changes were moving in the direction of stronger privacy and anonymity protections rather than weaker. In particular, I'm thinking about personal fertility tracking applications. Following some changes in the civil rights environment in the United States, some organizations are certainly seeing personal health data as an area with potential for more innovation around anonymity. There's a whole research subfield that's focused on privacy enhancing technologies. One of those is some kind of cryptographic techniques that allow blocking of rule breakers without blocking anonymity preserving tools like Tor. And another strategy targets kind of this cheap pseudonym problem to make them less cheap. Finally, there's a set of strategies around moderation. This is the most recent result from the team. And our observation here is that these communities are able to make a pre-publication moderation model work and to do so without discouraging newcomers and account creation. And we know because we looked. So here's a figure extracted from that work. Once again, one of my interrupted time series with a 0 point where the rules change. And the high level takeaway from all of these little dots and lines is that after the extra screen was put in place, we did not see statistically significant differences in the overall activity volume. We saw less coming in from folks without accounts, but the overall volume in the community continued. And this result was kind of consistent across multiple measures. And that's in contrast with the example I showed with fandom.com, where the account requirement had that negative spillover. Community chose to change, added a moderation workflow, and they make it work without closing the community to contributors from folks, contributions from folks without accounts. All right, so every good academic research talk includes a slide about future work. Current work includes examining the value of anonymity in handling taboo subjects, extending the solution I described around pre-publication moderation, as well as kind of looking at new settings and techniques for measuring the value of anonymity. And that's where maybe some of you come in. I'm really eager for thoughts on this topic about ways to measure, places to measure. If you're making an identity requirements change to a site, let's talk. We can instrument it to do a good research project on it. All right. So my case to you is this, and I'm going to sum everything up for us. People have good reasons to be anonymous online, but platforms and communities may respond to them with suspicion and not take up their perspective. Anonymity seekers are often comparable to other groups like newcomers and casual contributors. They may offer some unique value or tackle riskier types of work. When they act badly, it may be similar to bad behavior we see from others, although banning them for being an anonymity seeker may make them angry or trigger a desire to subvert the block. And there are options for mitigating negative behaviors without banning. So a couple of action calls here. I want to invite you to challenge your own assumptions and challenge the assumptions you see out there in policies, platforms, and research about anonymity. I think we have opportunities to continue to innovate around anonymity, and I hope we can build stronger partnerships between platforms, research teams, and communities. All right, I'm eager for your feedback as we continue this work, and I really hope you have questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have questions? Okay, great.
I'm interested in the controversies that cause editors in content disputes to accuse each other of bad faith, and those that result in hegemonies, like when...
Hold on. He's interested in conflict disputes to get into the point when the editors accuse each other of bad faith. And what's the second part?
And hegemonies, where there's behind the scenes paid activism, like on fossil fuels, for example, or
did you say antigemonies?
Sorry, hegemonies, when you get a very broad agreement that one side of a controversy is correct, but the other side is perhaps also correct, or maybe there's a synthesis.
So heated controversies when both sides, there's some truth to both sides, basically. What's the question?
The question is, when one side's activists are being accused of bad faith, is the most successful strategy to try to remain anonymous, or become a recurring newcomer, or to try to create a long-term account?
Okay, so he's asking, when one side is being accused of bad faith, do you think it's more useful to become anonymous, or to have a new account, or to have a long account sort of with a reputation, when you say long account? Do you hear me? When you said a long account?
This is
a long-term account. Does he think it's more useful to have an anonymous account, a long-term account, or what do you think is the best way to go in that situation?
Sure. So this sounds like it's really specific to the way things work in the Wikipedia community. And I'll say that oftentimes when you're in a point of questioning someone else's kind of motivations for whatever they're proposing or what have you, versus it being about the work, you're kind of questioning their heart. That in general, the techniques that I see people deploying in Wikipedia and in conversations online is that one way that they try to boost their own credibility is indeed by revealing information about themselves. They're trying to make an argument that that's not where my heart is, that's not my intent. And so people who are activists or who are in those discussions might very well feel pressure to reveal details about themselves. But to the extent that the argument is about the work, especially within Wikipedia, the work can speak for itself. Being humans, the arguments that we make, sometimes we sway each other more or less based on our apparent credibility, based on our identity or our credentials. But we do have some avenues of persuasion that are available to us without revealing all of those details about ourselves. So I will say that if you're somebody with a long history in Wikipedia and you're getting accused of bad faith, maybe the person's right, maybe they're wrong. You look at your own heart and you need to make your own call there. But I do think there's options for people who need to protect their privacy to continue to do so, and to do so in a way that's credible, especially if their orientation is to the work or to the facts, rather than to trying to convince someone about something about who they are. Because if you want to convince someone about who you are in your heart, hiding who you are in your heart is not going to help you, right? I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah? Okay, great. He's got a thumbs up. He liked your answer.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else with a question for Kaylea? Will we have her here? Oh, good. We're going to have another question.
I was curious your thoughts on platforms like Twitch. A lot of people are building their whole career around like an alternate avatar, like they call it like.
Okay, just a second. So he's asking about platforms like Twitch, where people are building their whole career around an alternate avatar from their
Yeah.
in real life identity.
Yeah, so they use like an anime character or an animal or whatever.
Right.
I was curious if you thought maybe acceptance of an anonymous persona, maybe you have to make a persona that's interesting or engaging for people that's still anonymous but not you, I guess, is what I'm saying.
So okay, so he's talking about when you have an anonymous persona that is engaging. And what's the question?
So my question is it, would people accept you being anonymous online more if your anonymous persona was more interesting than just user 1234?
Okay. He's asking if you think that the anonymous personalities that are more interesting, are you saying they might have more credibility, or do the people just like them more? More accepted if they are sort of a likable anonymous personality. Do you think?
So my field is communication, and there's a body of theories in communication about what's called the hyper-personal, and that online, that we can create kind of stronger relationships with maybe an idealized version of ourselves if we care to, that we can perhaps be more vulnerable, more available, more genuine, and somehow sort of less available, less visible, less genuine at the same time, because people don't maybe have to see our faces because they only see our hands in our stream or what have you. So I think that's a really interesting space that Twitch streamers play with. I will say that streamers, especially women, contend with a lot of harassment, and they have good reason to hide personal details about their lives. Even perfectly sort of burly farmers out in the rural areas will have people like drive up to their front gate and try to break in and like see the animals. So I think that I think that being anonymous in an online streaming environment might actually be more necessary because of not only these kind of hyper-personal interactions that you create, but also what's called a parasocial relationship, where you think you're their friend, but really they are the best friend of like thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, where it creates kind of this disproportionate sense of closeness to somebody. So in that Twitch environment, I think you're better off trying to maintain some amount of your privacy, if not your anonymity, just for your own safety. But then again, to the extent that your presence is read as real and then people find out you're not real, there are plenty of cases where that leads to your followers, as it were, deciding to abandon you. Which you start to get into some of this language that's a little bit about like religious cults in a certain way. People become disillusioned with the person that they were following, and they follow someone else. It's a risk, I think, that creators who choose this genre, they absolutely run this risk. And I think it's part of that media.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Any other questions that we have? Okay, let's give Kaylea a big round of applause.